Assalamualaikum and good day. Today, I'm Alia Farhana from the Faculty of Computer and Mathematical Science, University of Malaysia Alam, want to present to you my research paper entitled Analyzing the Effect of Production Sector on Economic Growth in Malaysia and ARDL Approach. Next is a summary for the introduction. Background of the study: the growth of GDP can be called as a GDP growth rate or economic growth. The real GDP is a reflection of the fact that change in GDP due to the inflation. According to the International Monetary Fund in 2020, Malaysian economy is the fourth largest in Southeast Asia. However, in the first quarter 2020, GDP recorded 0.7%, while in the second quarter it recorded negative 17.1%, as all economic sectors affected due to the pandemic COVID-19. The government has started to reopen all the economic sector back in the third quarter 2020. And economic sector that are affected by this pandemic are slowly gaining momentum and gradually moving up. Nevertheless, the fourth wave of the pandemic COVID-19 in August 2021 has ended, and it may execute the challenge of the leading index prediction on economic pattern in the future. Therefore, the objective of this study was to explore the long-run and short-run impact of the production sector on economic growth and to find out which sector drove the Malaysian economy. Next is the problem statement. The current issue of the pandemic COVID-19 has spread across the world and has caused the economy to collapse and slump for the coming year. The issue arises as the previous study focusing more to the univariate modeling compared to the multivariate modeling, even though there are the various factors impacting the economic growth. Similarly, this issue become more decisive as many previous studies using multivariate model, such as vector AUTOREGRESSIVE VAR approach, that indicate only short-term period compared to the methodology for the long-term period. There are various multivariate modeling techniques for the long-term period that can be used for the predicting GDP growth in Malaysia, such as autoregressive distribution depth, ARDL, vector error correlation model, VECM, and others. Hence, the approach that will be used for this study has to be determined, which is ARDL. ARDL is chosen because this technique is more robust and perform better for the small sample size of the data, as this study is using a small sample of data. Next is research objective and methodology. For the first objective is to explore the long-run and short-run impact of the production sector on economic growth. And the second objective is to determine which sector that drove the Malaysian economic performance. For the methodology, we use the Bound test for the long run, autoregressive distribution depth ARDL, and error correlation model for the short run. Next is research framework. Firstly is data collection and preparation. We collect the quarterly data from the Department of Statistics Malaysia and develop the line graph correlation test for the variable. Secondly is determining stationary on the time series. All the variables we will test for stationary using ADF test and Philip parent test. Thirdly is ARDL model. Firstly, to measure long-run equilibrium relationship and test for the short run using error correlation model. And lastly is model validation and stability. First is to evaluate and validate the model using Jarque-Berra test and Bush-Godfrey test for heterogeneity and autocorrelation. And secondly is to identify the model stability using Kusum test. Next is analysis and result. Descriptive statistics. Pattern analysis on economic growth. As you can see on the graph, the data show the fall of the GDP growth in specific year due to the economic condition. From the first quarter 2005, the growth showed a cyclical movement before it goes downturn in year 2009 due to the economic crisis. However, the pattern became growing as it recorded the highest growth with 10.1% for the first quarter 2010. This pattern became distributed caused by the pandemic COVID-19 as it recorded the worst trend with the growth of negative 17.1% in the second quarter 2020. Next is correlation test. As you can see on the table, all the probability of the production sector are lowest than 0.05 significant level. Hence, it can be concluded that all the variables in the production sector are correlated to the GDP and can be utilized to estimate economic growth. Next is determining stationary of the time series. For this paper, I'm using two different unit root tests. First, ADF unit root test. Secondly is Philip parent unit root test. For ADF unit root test, all the variables are stationary at the level phase, except mining, with probability is 0.3932 higher than the p-value 0.05. For Philip Barron unit root test, all the variables are stationary at level phase except contraction, with probability of 0.0592 higher than p-value 0.05. The result of the phase differencing show that the mining and contraction has stationary at the first differencing. By comparing those two unit root tests, the results show that all the variables are not stationary at the same phase. Therefore, for these studies, the variable will have a mixed stationary. Development of autoregressive distribution like ARDL model. Firstly is the Bound test. The f-statistic value is 1808.449, appear to be higher than 5% significant level with 2.92, 2.62 for the first level and 3.79 in the first differencing. This indicates that this model rejects the null hypothesis with no level relationship between the variable. Therefore, those variables are cointegrate and the analysis will be proceed to the long run and the short run dynamic error correlation model. Next is autoregressive distribution like ARDL model. As you can see on the table, the probability of the t-test of all variables are significant except for GDP in leg 1 and mining in leg 1. The R-squared and adjusted show the higher value with 0.99. This model also significant and fit because the probability of f-statistic is 0.00, lower than 0.05 significant level. Hence, since the model is significant, the future analysis can be carried using error correlation model or short-run tests. Error correlation model ECM estimation. Based on the probability of t-test, only agriculture and mining are significant and has a short-run relationship with economic growth. The error correlation term that represent as coefficient equation is negative with an associated coefficient estimate of negative 0.979257. It implies that about 97.92% of any movement is this equilibrium are correlated for within one period or in the short run. Next is model validation and stability. For this paper, I'm using 3 different tests to determine the model validation. Firstly is the normality test, Jacobi-Berra test. As you can see, the p-value is 0.330991. So we can conclude that residual are normally distributed. Next is Bruch-Pagan-Goffey test. As you can see also, the p-value is higher with 0.0552. So it can be concluded the variance of the residual is assumed to be constant for all period of time. And lastly, I'm using Bruch-Goffey LM test. This test for the autocorrelation. The p-value also indicate that 0.3129 is higher than 0.05 significant level. So the residual are not correlated to each other. And next for the stability test, this paper is using Kusum test. The model will predict the variable seems good as it derives in the middle. Therefore, the result of ARDL are consistent with stable and can be used to predict the economy. Finally, the conclusion and recommendation. The empirical evidence displays that all variables are not stationary in the same phase. In other words, the variables have mixed stationary. Thus, the appropriate technique for the modeling the economic growth is ARDL approach. For ARDL model, ARDL Bound tests show that there is a long-term relationship between economic growth and the production sector. While in the short run, it shows that only agriculture and mining are significantly correlated to economic growth. As it showed in the finding, ARDL model indicate that all production sectors are significantly affected by economic growth. This finding can benefit the policymakers, industrial, stakeholders, and investors, not only in Malaysia, but throughout the world. Therefore, further study can propose other techniques that are appropriate and significantly contribute to the growth of the economy, while develop a new model that is more accurate and efficient for predicting the upcoming economic growth in Malaysia. Thank you.